19. The Peace Conference. All the other delegates to the peace conference were on hand when Noonan and I arrived at Wilson's home at the appointed time, 9 o'clock that night. Everybody nodded to us, but the greetings didn't go any further than that. Pete the Finn was the only one I hadn't met before. The bootlegger was a big-boned man of 50 with a completely bald head. His forehead was small, his jaws enormous, wide, heavy, bulging with muscle. We sat around Wilson's library table. Old Elihu sat at the head. The short-clipped hair on his round pink skull was like silver in the light. His round blue eyes were hard, domineering under their bushy white brows. His mouth and chin were horizontal lines. On his right, Pete the Finn sat watching everybody with tiny black eyes that never moved. Reno Starkey sat next to the bootlegger. Reno's sallow, hoarse face was as stolidly dull as his eyes. Max Dollar was tilted back in a chair on Wilson's left. The little gambler's carefully pressed pant legs were carelessly crossed. A cigarette hung from one corner of his tight-lipped mouth. I sat next to Thaler. Noonan sat on my other side. Elihu Wilson opened the meeting. He said things couldn't go on the way they were going. We were all sensible men, reasonable men, grown men who had seen enough of the world to know that a man couldn't have everything his own way no matter who he was. Compromises were things everybody had to make sometimes. To get what he wanted, a man had to give other people what they wanted. He said he was sure that what we all most wanted now was to stop this insane killing. He said he was sure that everything could be frankly discussed and settled in an hour without turning Personville into a slaughterhouse. It wasn't a bad oration. When it was over, there was a moment of silence. Thaler looked past me at Noonan as if he expected something of him. The rest of us followed his example, looking at the chief of police. Noonan's face turned red, and he spoke huskily. Whisper, forget you killed Tim. He stood up and held out a beefy paw. Here's my hand on it. Thaler's thin mouth curved into a vicious smile. Your bastard of a brother needed killing, but I didn't kill him, he whispered coldly. Red became purple in the chief's face. I said loudly, Wait, Noonan, we're going at this wrong. We won't get anywhere unless everybody comes clean. Otherwise, we'll all be worse off than before. Max Swain killed Tim, and you know it. He stared at me with dumbfounded eyes. He gaped. He couldn't understand what I had done to him. I looked at the others, tried to look virtuous as hell, asked, That's settled, isn't it? Let's get the rest of the kicks squared. I addressed Pete the Finn. How do you feel about yesterday's accident to your warehouse and the 4 men? One hell of an accident, he rumbled. I explained. Noonan didn't know you were using the joint. He went there thinking it empty just to clear the way for a job in town. Your men shot first, and then he really thought he had stumbled into Thaler's hideout. When he found out he'd been stepping in your puddle, he lost his head and touched the place off. Thaler was watching me with a hard, small smile in eyes and mouth. Reno was all dull stolidity. Elihu Wilson was leaning toward me, his old eyes sharp and wary. I don't know what Noonan was doing. I couldn't afford to look at him. I was in a good spot if I played my hand right, and in a terrible one if I didn't. The men, they get paid for taking chances, Pete the Finn said. For the other, 25 grand will make it right. Noonan spoke quickly, eagerly. All right, Pete, all right, I'll give it to you. I pushed my lips together to keep from laughing at the panic in his voice. I could look at him safely now. He was licked, broken, willing to do anything to save his fat neck, or to try to. I looked at him. He wouldn't look at me. He sat down and looked at nobody. He was busy trying to look as if he didn't expect to be carved apart before he got away from these wolves to whom I had handed him. I went on with the work, turning to Elihu Wilson. Do you want to squawk about your bank being knocked over, or do you like it? Max Dollar touched my arm and suggested, We could tell better maybe who's entitled to beef if you'd give us what you've got first. I was glad to. Noonan wanted to nail you, I told him, but he either got word or expected to get word from Yard and Wilson here to let you alone. So he thought if he had the bank looted and framed you for it, your backers would ditch you and let him go after you right. Yard, I understand, was supposed to put his okay on all the capers in town. You'd be cutting into his territory and ripping off Wilson. That's how it would look. And that was supposed to make them hot enough that they'd help Noonan cop you. He didn't know you were here. Reno and his mom were in the can. Reno was Yard's pup, but he didn't mind crossing up his head man. He already had the idea that he was about ready to take the burg away from Lou. I turned to Reno and asked, "Isn't that it?" He looked at me woodenly and said, "You're telling it." I continued telling it. Noonan fakes a tip that you're at Cedar Hill and takes all the coppers he can't trust out there with him, even cleaning the traffic detail out of Broadway so Reno would have a clear road. McGraw and the bulls that are in on the play let Reno and his mob sneak out of the Hooskow, pull the job, and duck back in. Nice thing in alibis. Then they got sprung on bail a couple of hours later. It looks as if Lou Yard tumbled. He sent Dutch Jake Wall and some other boys out to the Silver Arrow last night to teach Reno and his pals not to take things in their own hands like that. But Reno got away and got back to the city. It was either him or Lou then. He made sure which it would be by being in front of Lou's house with a gun when Lou came out this morning. Reno seems to have had the right dope, because I noticed that right now he's holding down a chair that would have been Lou Yard's if Lou hadn't been put on ice. Everybody was sitting very still, as if to call attention to how still they were sitting. Nobody could count on having any friends among those present. It was no time for careless motions on anybody's part. If what I said meant anything, one way or the other, to Reno, he didn't show it. Thaler whispered softly, "Didn't you skip some of it?" "You mean the part about Jerry?" I kept on being the life of the party. I was coming back to that. I don't know whether he got away from the can when you crushed out and was caught later, or whether he didn't get away or why. And I don't know how willingly he went along on the bank caper, but he did go along. And he was dropped and left in front of the bank because he was your right bower, and his being killed there would pin the trick to you. He was kept in the car till the getaway was on. Then he was pushed out and was shot in the back. He was facing the bank with his back to the car when he got his. Thaler looked at Reno and whispered, "Well?" Reno looked with dull eyes at Thaler and asked calmly, "What of it?" Thaler stood up, said, "Deal me out," and walked to the door. Pete the Finn stood up, leaning on the table with big bony hands, speaking from deep in his chest. "Whisper." And when Thaler had stopped and turned to face him, "I'm telling you this. You whisper, and all of you. That damn gun work is out. All of you understand it. You got no brains to know what is best for yourselves. So I'll tell you, this busting the town open is no good for business. I won't have it anymore. You be nice boys, or I'll make you. I got one army of young fellows that know what to do on any end of a gun. I got to have them in my racket. If I got to use them on you, I'll use them on you. You want to play with gunpowder and dynamite? I'll show you what playing is. You like to fight? I'll give you fighting. Mind what I tell you, that's all." Pete the Finn sat down. Thaler looked thoughtful for a moment and went away without saying or showing what he had thought. His going made the others impatient. None wanted to remain until anybody else had time to accumulate a few guns in the neighborhood. In a very few minutes, Elihu Wilson and I had the library to ourselves. We sat and looked at one another. Presently he said, "How would you like to be chief of police?" "No, I'm a rotten errand boy." "I don't mean with this bunch. After we've got rid of them." "And got another just like them." "Damn you," he said. "It wouldn't hurt to take a nicer tone to a man old enough to be your father." "Who curses me and hides behind his age." Anger brought a vein out, blue in his forehead. Then he laughed. "You're a nasty talking lad," he said, "but I can't say you haven't done what I paid you to do." "A swell lot of help I've got from you." "Did you need wet nursing? I gave you the money and a free hand. It's what you asked for. What more did you want?" "You old pirate," I said. "I blackmailed you into it, and you played against me all the way till now, when even you can see that they're hell-bent on gobbling each other up. Now you talk about what you did for me." "Old pirate," he repeated. "Son, if I hadn't been a pirate, I'd still be working for the Anaconda for wages, and there'd be no Personville Mining Corporation. You're a damned little woolly lamb yourself, I suppose. I was had, son, where the hair was short. There were things I didn't like, worse things that I didn't know about until tonight. But I was caught and had to bide my time. Why, since that Whisper Thaler's been here, I've been a prisoner in my own home, a damned hostage." "Tough. Where do you stand now?" I demanded. "Are you behind me?" "If you win." I got up and said, "I hope to Christ you get caught with him." He said, "I reckon you do, but I won't." He squinted his eyes merrily at me. "I'm financing you. That shows I mean well, don't it? Don't be too hard on me, son. I'm kind of—" I said, "Go to hell," and walked out.